What do you do when the life you rejected walks past your car, holding proof you were wrong? A powerful man thought he'd escaped his past until one crosswalk changed everything. Welcome to Nia Love Stories. Drop a comment with your city so we can see how far this story travels. If stories about power, regret, and the cost of control speak to you, subscribe for more. Now get comfortable and don't look away. He left the gala before the speeches ended. Crystal chandeliers reflected off black marble floors. Donors applauded on cue. Promises were exchanged without being spoken aloud. The boss took his fiancée by the arm and guided her toward the exit, already thinking 3 steps ahead. She moved beside him with practiced grace, champagne silk catching the light, dark hair swept into a flawless chignon. At 29, she understood the performance. In their 6 months together, she had learned he valued composure over curiosity. That went well, she murmured as they reached the marble steps. The mayor's wife asked about the foundation's literacy program. Good. His hand remained at the small of her back, guiding without pressure. At 42, he had perfected the appearance of legitimacy, the tailored tuxedo, the charitable donations, the public presence that suggested nothing to hide. Philanthropy was the cleanest form of power. The valet brought the black sedan around.
Polished.
Expensive enough to command respect, common enough to avoid attention. The boss opened the door for his fiancée, watched her settle into leather, then moved to the driver's side. The car door closed. Leather. Silence. He pulled into traffic, merging smoothly into Friday evening flow. The city moved around them. Office towers bleeding light into dusk, pedestrians crowding sidewalks, distant saxophone notes carrying through autumn air. His phone buzzed in the center console. Encrypted messages. Business that never stopped. He ignored them. Friday nights were reserved for maintaining the illusion of normalcy. I like this version of you, his fiancée said, adjusting an earring that had never been out of place. When we first met, you seemed so intense, like you were constantly calculating something. His grip tightened slightly on the wheel. Intense. The last relationship had revealed that about him, that he operated in constant assessment, that he couldn't turn off the part measuring risks and exits, that he was fundamentally incapable of what others called intimacy. I've learned to appreciate simplicity, he said. And he had. After years of emotional negotiations that felt like hostage situations, of conversations about futures he couldn't commit to, simplicity felt like victory. His engagement was deliberately shallow. She fit into his world without requiring he reshape it. She asked no questions about where he went or who he met. She made no demands about children or domestic routines or permanence that required vulnerability. It was perfect because it was controlled. Traffic slowed 2 blocks from the venue. Red lights. Pedestrians flooding the crosswalk. Professionals clutching briefcases, couples hand in hand, teenagers in clusters. The boss watched with detached observation, his mind already on the restaurant, the wine list, the weekend that would unfold exactly as designed. Then something made him focus. A woman stepped into the street with deliberate calm, holding the hands of 2 small children. Not babies. Children. 4 or 5 years old, from their height and purposeful walk. They moved beside her with the ease of routine, no hesitation, no glances at waiting cars, just forward momentum. Auburn hair fell in waves past her shoulders. Jeans and a leather jacket. Nothing remarkable, but she moved through the crowd as if she owned the moment. Not rushing, Not cautious, just present. The boss's breath stopped. Even from this distance, even with her face angled away, he knew. The line of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself like someone who had chosen exactly where she stood. Carrie Ellis, his ex-fiancée. The woman he had left 5 years ago without looking back. One child, the boy, glanced toward the sedan. A flicker of curiosity, eyes catching headlight reflections against black paint. Less than a second. The girl kept her eyes forward, matching her mother's rhythm with practiced precision. Twins. Old enough to walk without being guided. Old enough to mean years had passed without him. Old enough to mean choices had been made while he was busy building the life he'd convinced himself he wanted. Carrie's head remained angled away. Not avoidance, that would require acknowledgement. This was refusal. The kind that didn't need speaking because it had been decided years ago. The girl tugged on Carrie's hand, saying something he couldn't hear. Carrie leaned down without stopping, nodded, kept walking. Her expression remained calm, like someone who had long since stopped being affected by what she'd left behind. The lights green. His fiancée's voice cut through the static. He blinked. Cars behind him were waiting. Carrie had already reached the opposite sidewalk, disappearing with her children flanking her like anchors to a life he knew nothing about. His hands trembled as he pressed the accelerator. Traffic resumed. Nothing had been said. Everything had changed. His fiancée studied his face instead of the street. She didn't ask what was wrong. She had survived in his world by reading shifts in power, and she already knew something fundamental had fractured. The boss kept his eyes forward, but his mind calculated at violent speed. Had Carrie been pregnant when they separated? Had she known and chosen silence? Or had she discovered it afterward and decided to proceed alone, to build a life that didn't include him, didn't need him, didn't even acknowledge his existence? 5 years ago, Carrie had told him she wanted a family someday. Not immediately. Not as ultimatum. Just as truth about what she hoped her life would include. He'd been brutally honest about his unwillingness to become someone he wasn't. He couldn't offer domesticity. He couldn't offer the visibility children required. He couldn't offer presence without control, and fatherhood demanded surrender he had no intention of giving. She had listened without arguing, nodded quietly. The next morning, she'd agreed they weren't compatible.
No screaming. No accusations.
No attempts to change minds. Just two people facing incompatibility with maturity and walking away before the damage became irreparable. The cleanest ending of his life. Professional, even. But now, seeing her with those twins, walking calmly as if she'd never needed him, as if the life they'd almost built had been replaced with something more solid, more real, something cracked beneath his carefully maintained control. "You look like someone just walked over your grave," his fiancée said quietly. "Do you know that woman?" "Just someone I used to know." But he was thinking about specifics. The night before their breakup, when Carrie had asked what kind of future he saw, he'd told her the truth. No children, no suburban routines, no vulnerabilities he couldn't control. She'd nodded quietly, and the next morning everything had ended with surgical precision. He'd thought that made him strong.
Clear-eyed.
Uncompromising. Now, he wondered if clarity had actually been cowardice. He pulled into the restaurant's private entrance. His fiancée was already reapplying lipstick, preparing for the performance of being exactly what he'd chosen. Beauty without complications. Partnership without expectations. Power without vulnerability. She represented everything he thought he'd wanted. A woman who fit into his world, without requiring he reshape it. A woman who asked no questions that demanded truth. So, why did his chest feel hollow? Why did the image of Carrie walking forward with those children, calm, steady, complete, make his meticulously constructed life feel suddenly, devastatingly empty? As he handed his keys to the valet, one question burned through every calculation he'd ever made. What if the life he'd been so determined to avoid was the only one that mattered? The restaurant was Italian. Expensive. The kind of place where reservations were made weeks in advance and the sommelier remembered preferences without being reminded. The boss and his fiancée were seated immediately, guided to a corner table with the kind of privacy that came with recognition and regular patronage. His fiancée ordered wine. He nodded at something appropriate. The waiter recited specials in rehearsed cadence. None of it registered. All he could see was Carrie stepping into that crosswalk. Not the memory of her from 5 years ago. The woman who had packed her things methodically, who had refused his offer to help her move, who had looked at him with something worse than anger. Acceptance. Finality. The kind of look that said she had already grieved what they'd been and was ready to become something else.
No.
What he saw was the woman from 20 minutes ago. Auburn hair longer than she used to wear it. Jeans instead of the dresses she'd favored when they were together. Leather jacket worn soft at the elbows. And the twins. One on each side. Their small hands in hers. The way she'd moved, not tentative, not performative. Just present. Like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. School pickups. Grocery stores. Pediatrician appointments. A rhythm that had nothing to do with him. You haven't touched your wine, his fiancée said. The boss looked down. His glass was full. He couldn't remember if he'd lifted it. Long day. Clearly. She watched him with the careful attention of someone deciding whether to push or retreat. She chose retreat. Smart. She always was. But her silence only gave him more space to replay what he'd seen. The boy's brief glance toward the car. Curious, but not concerned. The girl's steady focus forward. Neither child had looked like they were missing anything. Neither had seemed incomplete. That was the part that cut deepest. He had convinced himself, in the years since Carrie left, that his honesty had been a kindness. That telling her he couldn't be what she needed had saved them both from prolonged suffering. That walking away had been the mature choice. But those children didn't look like products of loss. They looked grounded, secure, like they had everything they needed, which meant Carrie had given them everything they needed. Without him, the waiter returned. His fiancée ordered for both of them. The boss realized he'd missed the entire exchange. I think we should talk about what just happened, his fiancée said once the waiter had left. Nothing happened. You saw someone who clearly meant something to you. And now you're somewhere else entirely. She folded her hands on the table. I'm not asking you to explain. I'm just acknowledging what's obvious. The boss met her eyes. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even hurt. She was assessing, calculating whether this changed the terms of their arrangement. It was exactly the kind of pragmatism he'd thought he wanted. She's from a long time ago, he said finally. And the children? He didn't answer. Couldn't. Because he didn't know. And the not knowing was worse than any truth could have been. His fiancée nodded slowly. I see. The food arrived. They ate in careful silence. The wine was excellent. The pasta was perfectly prepared. Everything was exactly as it should be. And all of it tasted like absolutely nothing. The drive back to his penthouse was quiet. His fiancée had stopped trying to fill the silence somewhere between dessert and the valet bringing the car around. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, gaze fixed on the city lights sliding past the window. The boss pulled into the underground garage, killed the engine. Neither of them moved. "I should go home tonight," she said finally. Not angry, just factual.
He didn't argue.
"I'll have the driver take you." She nodded, gathered her clutch, and stepped out without waiting for him to open her door. The click of her heels echoed against concrete as she walked toward the elevator. She didn't look back. The boss sat alone in the silent car. "I want children someday," Carrie had said. They'd been in his old apartment, smaller than the penthouse, back when he was still building rather than maintaining. She'd said it casually, while chopping vegetables for dinner, like it was just another detail about her future. Not now, but eventually. He'd put down his wine glass. "I don't." She'd stopped chopping, looked at him. "Ever?" "Ever." The conversation that followed had been calm.
Too calm.
Carrie explaining what she hoped for, not immediately but someday. Stability. A family. The kind of life where people showed up consistently. The boss explaining with surgical precision why he couldn't offer that. His work demanded flexibility. His world required compartmentalization. Children needed presence he wasn't willing to give. She'd listened, nodded, asked clarifying questions like she was negotiating a contract. The next morning, she'd told him she was leaving.
No tears. No ultimatums.
Just, "I understand what you're telling me, and I believe you. So I think it's better if we end this now, before either of us invests more in something that won't work." He'd thought her maturity was admirable, professional, even. Now he wondered if she'd already been planning her exit, if she'd already known what she would choose. His phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket. 3 missed calls, 2 from business associates, 1 from a number he didn't recognize, but that triggered something in his memory. A 202 area code, Washington, D.C. Then a text from an encrypted number. "We need to talk. Some files have been reopened. T.G. Tony Gardner, federal agent." Someone the boss had carefully cultivated as a contact years ago, back when having law enforcement connections felt like insurance rather than liability. The boss stared at the message. Timing was never coincidental in his world. He could call Gardner back, find out what files, what pressure, what exposure. Or he could deal with the more immediate problem, the one that had nothing to do with federal investigations and everything to do with 2 children in a crosswalk. He opened a different app, typed in a name, Carrie Ellis. His thumb hovered over the search button. If he looked, he would know. Addresses, employment, school districts, whether those children were his, whether Carrie had been pregnant when she walked away, whether she'd chosen to exclude him or simply moved forward when he made clear he wouldn't follow. He locked the phone without searching.
Not yet.
Because once he knew, he would have to decide what to do with the information. And every option felt like standing at the edge of something he'd spent 5 years avoiding. The boss sat in the silent garage, hands still on the wheel, staring at nothing. Avoidance had always been his most reliable strategy. But the image of Carrie walking forward, calm, complete, unbothered, had already lodged itself somewhere he couldn't reach. And he knew, even as he tried to convince himself otherwise, that avoidance was no longer possible. Carrie woke at 6:15. Same time every weekday. The twins' school started at 8, which meant breakfast at 6:45, dressed by 7:20, out the door by 7:35. The rhythm was deliberate, predictable, the kind of structure that made children feel safe. She moved through the narrow kitchen, setting out bowls and spoons. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a living room that doubled as dining space. Nothing like the penthouse she'd visited years ago, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and marble countertops. But every piece of furniture here had been chosen intentionally. The bookshelf she'd refinished herself during pregnancy. The kitchen table from a neighbor who was downsizing. The framed drawings from the twins' preschool years. Mama, Oliver took my blue crayon. Emma appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her school uniform, hair needing to be brushed. Did you ask him to give it back? Carrie poured milk into bowls. Yes. And he said he was using it. Then you'll need to wait until he's finished, or choose a different color. Emma considered this with the seriousness of someone for whom crayon access was a legitimate crisis. But I need blue for the sky. The sky can be purple, or pink, or yellow. Carrie handed her a bowl of cereal. Real skies are all kinds of colors if you pay attention. Emma took the bowl, still skeptical but willing to negotiate with reality. Oliver emerged moments later, blue crayon clutched in his fist, triumphant. They ate breakfast. Carrie braided Emma's hair. Oliver spilled juice and cleaned it without being asked, a skill that had taken months to establish. They brushed teeth. Packed backpacks. Emma argued briefly about wearing her jacket. Oliver forgot his library book and had to run back inside. By 7:35, they were walking to school. 3 blocks through a neighborhood where people knew her name. Mrs. Chen watering plants on her stoop. Mr. Rodriguez heading to his bakery. The crossing guard who'd been helping children cross for 20 years. This life was visible, witnessed, grounded in routines that didn't require secrecy or compartmentalization. Carrie had built it deliberately, brick by brick, while pregnant and terrified. She'd found an apartment she could afford, enrolled in a certification program that could be completed online, applied for assistance without shame, made friends with other mothers at prenatal classes, created a network that didn't depend on one person's presence or absence. When the twins were born, she'd listed no father on their birth certificates. Not out of spite, out of clarity. The man she'd loved had told her exactly who he was. She'd believed him, and she'd chosen certainty over negotiation. She dropped the twins at school. Emma ran to her classroom without looking back. Oliver waved once, then disappeared into the hallway with his best friend Marcus. Carrie stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching other parents navigate their mornings. Drop-offs and pickups. Permission slips and snack schedules. The ordinary architecture of family life. Then she felt it. A shift in the air. The sensation of being noticed after years of being invisible. She turned slowly, scanning the street. No black sedan.
No familiar silhouette.
Just morning traffic and pedestrians and the normal rhythm of a Friday. But the feeling remained. The past had finally looked her direction. And Carrie knew, with the certainty of someone who'd made this choice once before, that she would need to decide again whether to acknowledge it, or keep walking forward without looking back. The investigators' report arrived Monday morning. 12 pages. Thorough. Useless. Carrie Ellis. Age 37. Employed as a medical billing specialist for a regional healthcare network. Salary. $58,000 annually. Rents a 2-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill. No outstanding debts beyond student loans, paid consistently. No criminal record.
No suspicious associations.
The twins. Emma and Oliver Ellis. Age 5. Enrolled at Lincoln Elementary. No father listed on birth certificates. Pediatric records clean. Both children current on vaccinations, dental checkups, school physicals.
No leverí. No weakness.
No thread to pull that would unravel anything. The boss closed the file and stared at the city through his office windows. 42 floors up. He'd built this view through careful accumulation of pressure points, knowing what people needed, what they feared, what they would trade to make problems disappear. None of it worked on someone who had built a life that could withstand scrutiny.
His phone rang.
He checked the screen. Tony Gardner. "We need to meet," Gardner said without preamble. They met at a coffee shop downtown. Neutral territory. Gardner arrived in a suit that said federal agent without requiring a badge. Mid-50s, gray at the temples, eyes that had stopped being surprised by human behavior decades ago. "Some old cases are getting fresh attention," Gardner said, stirring sugar into black coffee. "Financial networks we thought were dormant. They're not dormant. I've been out of that world for years." "I know. That's why I'm giving you the courtesy call." Gardner met his eyes. "Edward Wallace from Treasury is asking questions. And Jeremy Haynes from Justice is building files. You know how this works. Once they start looking, they find things. Even things that have been buried carefully." The boss said nothing. "My advice." Gardner leaned back. "Stay clean. Stay visible. Don't do anything that looks like you're running." After Gardner left, the boss sat with cold coffee and the growing realization that his usual exits were closing. Wallace would scrutinize financial records. Haynes would build cases. And any sudden moves, leaving the city, liquidating assets, distancing from associates, would look like consciousness of guilt. He was being boxed in. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We should discuss your options." "Call me." J.H. Jeremy Haynes. Offering solutions before problems were formally acknowledged, which meant the problems were already significant. The boss deleted the message. He couldn't run, couldn't make anyone disappear, couldn't use the tools that had always worked before. And somewhere in this same city, Carrie was picking up children from school, making dinner, living a life that had nothing to do with federal investigations or carefully constructed exits. He pulled up the investigator's report again. Found the address. Lincoln Elementary. Dismissal at 3:15. He could go there, wait across the street, watch her routine, confirm what he already suspected about the twins. He checked his watch. 2:45. Then his phone rang again. His lawyer.
Urgent.
A meeting that couldn't wait. Questions from Treasury that needed answers today. The boss closed the report. Contact would have to wait. But not because he'd chosen delay. Because circumstances were already deciding for him. It happened on a Wednesday.
School pickup.
3:15. The boss waited across from Lincoln Elementary, parked where he could see the main entrance. Parents clustered in small groups, checking phones, making small talk. The kind of ordinary scene he'd never imagined himself inhabiting. Then Carrie emerged with the twins. Emma's backpack decorated with star stickers. Oliver carrying a folder of artwork. They walked toward the crosswalk, same rhythm he'd seen before.
Calm.
Purposeful. He stepped out of the car. Carrie saw him immediately. Her stride didn't falter. She guided the twins to a bench near the school entrance, spoke to them quietly, then walked toward him alone. She stopped 6 feet away, close enough to speak, far enough to maintain distance. "Carrie, you shouldn't be here." Her voice was level. Not angry, not afraid, just stating fact. I saw you last Friday at the crosswalk. I know. Are they mine? Carrie's expression didn't change. Yes. The confirmation landed without weight. No drama.
No explanation.
Just a single word that confirmed what he'd already calculated. Why didn't you? Tell you. Carrie tilted her head slightly. Because you told me exactly what you wanted. No children. No domestic life. No presence that required vulnerability. I believed you. So, I made a choice that didn't require your participation. You should have.
What?
Negotiated? Asked permission. Her voice remained calm. You were clear about what you could offer. I needed certainty, not compromise. So, I built a life that didn't depend on you showing up when it was convenient. The boss glanced toward the bench. The twins were coloring, unconcerned. They don't know. They know they have a mother who's never missed a school event, who shows up for fevers and nightmares and first days. They know consistency. They don't know absence framed as protection. I could have.
What?
Carrie interrupted quietly. Helped financially? I didn't need your money. Visited occasionally? They don't need confusion. You made your choice 5 years ago. I respected it, and I moved forward. He had no response. Every argument felt hollow against the architecture of what she'd built. I'm not trying to punish you, Carrie continued. I'm just being honest about what's possible now. You can't show up partially. You can't be present when it suits you and absent when it doesn't. Children need consistency, or they need clarity, not both. So, what are you saying? I'm saying if you want proximity to them, it has to be earned.
Predictably. Publicly.
No gifts that can't be explained.
No sudden appearances.
No promises you might not keep. She paused. And it starts with being ordinary enough to show up consistently. Not powerful enough to disappear when it gets difficult. And if I can't, then you stay away completely, like you have been. Carrie's gaze was steady. There's no shame in that. You told me who you were. I believed you then. I'll believe you now. She turned and walked back to the twins.
Knelt down.
Said something that made Oliver laugh. Emma showed her a drawing. The boss stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by witnesses, stripped of every tool he'd ever relied on. Carrie gathered the children's hands and walked away without looking back. The choice had been delivered.
No negotiation. No levery.
Just transformation or disappearance. The meeting was set for Thursday evening. Private room at a restaurant the boss had used for negotiations that required discretion. Tony Gardner arrived first. Edward Wallace followed. Jeremy Haynes came last, carrying a briefcase that likely contained the terms of his exit. We'll be direct, Wallace said, spreading documents across the table. Treasury letterhead. Account numbers. Transaction histories going back 7 years. These financial networks were structured carefully, but structure leaves patterns, and patterns tell stories. Gardner leaned forward. I've kept things quiet as long as I could, but Wallace has mandates I can't override. And once justice gets involved, he glanced at Haynes, the options narrow significantly. Haynes opened his briefcase, pulled out a folder. There's a deal on the table. Full cooperation. Relocation assistance. New identity infrastructure. You'd need to disappear completely. No contact with former associates.
No visible assets.
No ties to this city. The boss stared at the folder. When? 72 hours. After that, the investigation goes public. Indictments follow. Asset freezes. The kind of attention that makes disappearing exponentially more complicated. Wallace tapped one of the documents. We're not asking you to incriminate others. We're offering you an exit before this becomes a spectacle. You walk away clean. We close certain files. Everyone moves forward. And if I don't take it, then we proceed with the investigation, Wallace said flatly. Which means surveillance, depositions, your name in federal filings, everything you've built becoming evidence in a case that could take years to resolve. Gardner's expression was carefully neutral. They're offering you what most people in your position would kill for. A clean exit, protection, a future that doesn't involve courtrooms. The boss looked at each of them. Gardner, who'd been on his payroll in ways that couldn't be proven. Wallace, who was following mandates but offering mercy. Haynes, who was building a career on cases exactly like this. If I disappear, the boss said slowly, what happens to people associated with me? People who had no involvement in any of this. Haynes raised an eyebrow. We have no interest in civilians. This is about financial networks, not collateral damage. But surveillance would extend to anyone I've had contact with recently. Standard procedure, Wallace confirmed. The boss thought about Carrie walking the twins to school. Visible. Witnessed. Living a life that could withstand scrutiny because it had been built that way deliberately. If he disappeared, they'd investigate her. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she existed in proximity to him. They'd look at her employment, her apartment, her children's school records. They'd ask questions that would make neighbors wonder. They'd turn her carefully constructed, ordinary life into something that required explanation. And the twins would learn their father wasn't just absent. He was evidence. I need to think about it, the boss said. You have 48 hours, Haynes replied. After that, the offer expires. They left the documents on the table. Gardner lingered at the door. Take the deal. It's the smartest play you'll ever make. The boss sat alone with the folder in front of him. Disappear. Relocate. Start over somewhere, Carrie, and the twins would never find him. It was clean. Safe. Exactly the kind of exit he'd built his entire life around maintaining.
Or stay.
Face whatever Wallace and Haynes were building. Except that his presence would bring attention to everyone around him, including 2 children who didn't know his name. He opened the folder. Read the terms. New identity. Financial support. Geographic restrictions. A life that required erasing everyone he'd ever known, including the chance to become the kind of ordinary he'd spent 5 years avoiding. The boss closed the folder. And for the first time in his life, he chose exposure over power. The first meeting happened at a public park on Saturday morning.
10 o'clock.
Carrie had specified the time, the location, the duration. 1 hour. The playground near the community center, where witnesses were plentiful and expectations were clear. The boss arrived 10 minutes early. Waited on a bench with coffee he wouldn't drink. Carrie appeared at exactly 10 with the twins. Emma wore a purple jacket. Oliver carried a soccer ball. Neither looked toward him immediately. Carrie approached alone. The rules are simple. You show up when you say you will. You leave when I say it's time. You don't make promises about next time unless you're certain you can keep them. And you don't ask them to call you anything. They'll decide what feels right when they're ready. Understood. This isn't forgiveness. It's proximity. There's a difference. She walked back to the twins. Spoke quietly. Emma looked over with cautious curiosity. Oliver kicked his soccer ball toward a tree. The boss sat on the bench. Watched them play. Said nothing. After 20 minutes, Emma approached. Do you know how to push swings? I can learn. She studied him with the seriousness of someone conducting an interview. Okay, but not too high. Oliver likes it high, but I don't. He pushed her on the swing.
Gently.
She said higher. He pushed slightly harder. She laughed. Oliver ran over, demanding his turn. An hour later, Carrie said it was time to go. The boss stood immediately. Same time next week, he asked. We'll see. The second meeting, she texted him Thursday. Same park. Same time. He arrived early again. This time, Oliver kicked the soccer ball toward him. Can you play? They passed the ball back and forth. Oliver explaining rules the boss didn't entirely follow but pretended to understand. Emma drew pictures in the dirt with a stick, occasionally looking over to ensure he was still there. The third meeting, Carrie let him walk them to the ice cream shop afterward.
Public.
Neutral. The twins debated flavors with the intensity of contract negotiation. You can get one scoop, Carrie said firmly. But what if I get 2 small scoops? Oliver countered. That's still 2 scoops.
Emma chose chocolate.
Oliver chose mint chip, then immediately regretted it, but refused to admit it. The boss said nothing. Just paid. Watched the meet. Left when Carrie said it was time. By the 6th week, the meetings had a rhythm. Saturdays at 10. Sometimes the park. Sometimes the library. Once, the science museum where Oliver spent 40 minutes studying the planets and Emma decided she wanted to be an astronaut. The boss learned restraint he'd never needed before. Showing up meant more than arriving. It meant staying present through boredom, through tantrums, through Emma's detailed explanation of why her teacher was wrong about butterflies, through Oliver's stubborn refusal to wear his jacket even though it was cold. He learned that consistency wasn't dramatic. It was repetitive, and that repetition was the only currency that mattered. The twins stopped glancing at the parking lot when he arrived, stopped treating his presence like something that might vanish, started arguing with him the way they argued with Carrie, casually, naturally, without fear of consequence. Carrie never softened, but she stopped watching him like someone expecting failure. And somewhere in the routine of Saturday mornings and predictable schedules, drama was replaced by something quieter, something that looked almost like permanence. 3 months became 6. 6 became 9. The boss learned the twin schedules the way he'd once memorized financial patterns. School dismissal at 3:15. Soccer practice Tuesdays and Thursdays. Emma's art class on Wednesdays. Oliver's inexplicable hatred of green vegetables. The specific way Emma needed her sandwiches cut or she wouldn't eat them. He showed up for the small things. The elementary school fall festival, where he manned the ring toss booth for 2 hours while Oliver tried 43 times to win a stuffed dinosaur. Emma's art show, where her watercolor of a sunset hung between 20 other sunsets that looked exactly the same, but hers was clearly superior. Saturday morning library trips, where Oliver checked out books about space, and Emma chose chapter books she couldn't quite read yet, but refused to admit it. The federal investigation resolved quietly. Plea agreements. Restructured assets. Fines that hurt but didn't destroy. Wallace closed his files. Haynes moved on to bigger cases. Gardner sent a brief text. You chose the hard way. Respect. The boss's fiancée had ended things professionally, without bitterness. You were somewhere else long before you saw that woman in the crosswalk, she'd said. I hope you find what you're actually looking for. His penthouse felt emptier now. He spent less time there. More time in diners near the twins' school. Coffee shops where he worked on a laptop while waiting for pickup time. Parks where he'd learned the names of other parents through repeated proximity. He was no longer the center of rooms, no longer the person others deferred to. He was just another parent navigating the ordinary architecture of showing up. Carrie never softened entirely, but she stopped hovering, started allowing him to take the twins to the park alone, let him stay for dinner occasionally, simple meals where Oliver complained about the vegetables and Emma told elaborate stories that went nowhere. "You're doing better than I expected," Carrie said one evening, washing dishes while the twins finished homework at the table. "That's not exactly a ringing endorsement. It's not meant to be."
She handed him a dish to dry.
"You're here. You're consistent. That's all I asked for. Is it enough?" Carrie looked at him for a long moment. "Ask me in another year." On a Tuesday in late spring, Carrie walked the twins home from school. The boss walked beside them, carrying Emma's backpack because she'd insisted it was too heavy even though it clearly wasn't. Oliver ran ahead, chasing a leaf the wind had picked up. Emma debated whether butterflies could recognize individual humans. Carrie reminded them about homework. The boss said nothing, just walked. They reached the crosswalk, the same one where everything had fractured 9 months earlier. This time they crossed together. Carrie didn't look back at the cars waiting, didn't check to see if he was still following. She just walked forward, the twins flanking her, their rhythm unchanged. The boss followed 3 steps behind, not leading, not controlling, just present. Emma glanced back once. "Are you coming for dinner? If your mom says it's okay." "It's okay," Carrie said without turning around. They reached the other side of the street, disappeared into the neighborhood where people knew Carrie's name and were starting to recognize his face. No forgiveness had been granted, no redemption earned, just proximity, consistency, the slow accumulation of moments that looked less like penance and more like permanence. The boss had spent his life building power through control. Now he was learning that presence required surrendering it entirely. And somewhere in the routine of Tuesday evenings and homework battles and the ordinary rhythm of showing up, he'd stopped counting the cost. Because the only way forward had always required walking behind someone who knew the way better than he ever would. Share in the comments what moment hit you hardest. And if you want more stories about redemption, power, and the cost of the choices we make, subscribe. The next story drops soon.